I think I have to give a bit of background how I went from petroleum engineering to social services, because that seems like a very different set of skill sets. So I graduated in 2017, and I don't know if all of you recall, but there was a huge bust in oil and gas at that point in time. And so that led me into creating one of my very first, I wouldn't call it a company, but it was sort of a miniature group with a couple of other students in my engineering. And we kind of thought to ourselves, what can we do as a group with one of our professors who actually taught us one of our courses here at this university? Can we partner up with him and come up with creative ways to be employed? Because there were absolutely no jobs at that point in time. So, you know, that sort of started a little bit of my entrepreneurship and what that would mean for me. And so I did that first sort of more petroleum engineering and engineering related work back in 2017. And then around 2019, and this was just before COVID hit, you know, we had a lot of work we were doing with different public sector groups, and specifically the city of Edmonton, actually. So we actually worked with them to build this software that would allow all of city staff to, you know, share ideas. And it really, during COVID, it kind of took up because a lot of people were working from home. And they needed better, more creative ways to talk to each other. And so that was sort of my first exposure to the public sector. And it was very interesting to see how technology could really help a lot of government and nonprofits. And through all of my work there, I've done a lot of different consulting within the public sector. And then that led me to what I'll talk about today with Duologue Systems is some of the disparity that I have seen time and again in sectors that are underfunded. And so if you look within, you know, generally when you're walking down the street in downtown Edmonton or even in Hub Mall, you probably see a ton of different folks coming in and out. I believe after COVID, it's become even more transient when you see, you can definitely see there are a lot more people that need supports. Sometimes they get the support, sometimes they don't. And that was one of the crucial pinnings to why I wanted to start something, because I can see how as we continue to build a lot of different technology solutions, a lot of different social groups can be left behind if we don't include them in the process of creating these different models. And so that was sort of the ethos why I started Duologue Systems. And just before I start, a lot of the content that I will be discussing today is a little bit sensitive. I'm going to be talking about our prison systems in Canada. A lot of you may not be aware of how those systems work. I'll also be talking a little bit about some of the homelessness that we see, potential substance abuse, addiction issues, stuff like that. So if at any point you feel uncomfortable, please raise your hands or just let me know, and I can give you some time to reflect. So just some information about Duologue Systems. So as Christine mentioned, you know, I started Duologue because of, you know, the lack of access to information. And when I mean what I mean by lack of access is really, as you all know, now, you know, post ChatGPT, there is a ton of information being flooded. You don't know what information is accurate. You don't know if it's correct. You don't know if it's personalized or if it makes sense for you. And this is all of us being able to access, you know, web services, being able to access computers. So now imagine someone that does not have the same level of literacy that we all have and does not have the same access to digital services. So a world for them is even more inaccessible. If they've never learned how to use a computer, if they don't know how to, you know, even form queries to figure out how to get help. And so that is a big, you know, disparity that I've seen in some of the work. And so that was one of the reasons why, again, I started this. And the other aspect you know, as you've all seen with ChatGPT is things can be so personal to who you are as a person, right? So if you start to talk to ChatGPT, you try and tell it whether it's your technical problem or school-related problems or anything, you know, if any of you maybe dabbled in some of the counseling that ChatGPT provides, like you can really share a lot of detail about yourself and it responds like a human being. And so that kind of helped me think about a little of how you could take something like this and then provide it to some people that have no access to services. So that was one of that personalization that I really wanted to get to. And then lastly, as you all know, like a lot of the information currently within existing language models, there might have not been any amount of consent when looking at how the data is used to create these models. And I wanted to make sure that as we move forward and work with groups that are already vulnerable, can we really bring them on the same table and help, and sort of give them the space to help them shape what we do with AI. And so that is a huge aspect of our work, is we really try to build things ethically and responsibly with the people that would be using our tools. And I'll get into that in a little bit here. So just a bit of background. I talked a bit about myself, but it's really important that I highlight one of my advisors, Jessica. So she also did her bachelor's in mathematics from the University of Alberta. And then she did her master's of art in community engagement. And I actually think sorry, this is wrong. It's master's of public health. That's what she's done. And her master's focused on what does success mean for women coming out of prison. And so she focused specifically on women because a lot of the issues that women face before they head to prison is generally very nonviolent. So women end up in prison due to things that are beyond themselves, right? So sometimes they're trying to take care of their kids, or they're in an abusive relationship, or they're trying to do something in order to protect or provide. And so generally, those are the reasons why they end up in prison. So when they leave, success to them success is very important, because if they are successful, they really raise the rest of their community around them. And so that was a big focus for her to figure out, how do you work with women leaving the system that are so vulnerable, and what are some of the supports we could give them to make their lives a bit easier. And over the past, I would say 10 to 12 years, Jessica has been working with a group of women every other Saturday, so twice a month. She goes into these success sharing story sessions, where she works with a lot of the women to figure out how to plan for success. And some of the women attending these sessions are either in prison currently, or they're in halfway houses, or they're just generally in community and have been out of prison for a couple of years, but they're still trying to figure out what to do with their lives. And I've been honored enough to attend maybe 2 or 3 of these sessions and really try to see what are some of the issues that we're seeing there. So a bit of background. So what the product that we've built in order to support some of the issues that we see people generally leaving the prison system is our system called Happy. So Happy is an AI-driven model that works right through SMS, so doesn't need any kind of Wi-Fi. And it's able to provide personalized assistance as a helpline right to the person on their phone. And it's really to support folks that are leaving prison systems, but really anyone with any type of vulnerability, right? So if you don't have a lot of money, you don't have access to laptops or any digital devices, how do you get from point A to point B? Or how do you figure out where your next housing step is? Or how do you figure out where to get food? So those are, the different communities that we're looking to support. And so some more background about why we built Happy in the first place. So like I talked about Jessica and her sort of work with women leaving the prison system, what we found is that information disparity. There are so many places, so many websites, I could say 1,000 websites in Edmonton alone that are trying to tell you where to go get food, how to get ID, how to get employment, or how to get employed, all of those things. But none of these websites really take into account who you are as a person, what your gender is, what demographic you're coming from, what is it in this website that you're really going to need. So the onus of the information and how to navigate something like this is put on the person instead of the information being readily available. So that was a huge barrier for people coming out, because they would need to figure out how to use a computer, how to navigate a website. And I need you to keep in mind, so some of these ladies that we were working with initially, Some of them might be younger, might have grown up using a phone, but others might have been in prison for over 10 years. And you all know in like a span of 10 years, technology has gone from what it was to what it is right now. So if someone is coming back into community without having that background of how technology is developed, everything is new to them. So in order to access a website, it can be the most difficult thing, even though it is so simple in how we've designed it for all of us here. And so one of the first things, as I speak about websites, what we actually, it started to, before we built Happy, we wanted to build an easier to use website so anybody could access it. So I actually went ahead and built that. Then we tested it with our users, which were these women leaving prison. And we could clearly see that this was one of the worst things we could have built for them. So testing with that user, working with them to see what is it that they need, made it very clear to me that this was not the right way forward. Like we can't build a website, we can't build an app. If we try that is too digital, it's going to turn off people. So is there something where we can use, you know, artificial intelligence the way it is, because I've been working with it for a couple of years, can we use some of the benefits of this technology, but employ it for these women coming out of prison? And that's where the whole SMS structure came to being. And one last thing I'll mention here is beyond resources, like I just said, a lot of people coming back into community might not be aware of, you know, how to maybe get a SIN number. What is a SIN number? How do I do taxes? How, you know, what are the, I think the Waterdale Bridge was made in the past 10 years. So there might just be monuments or places in the city that they have no idea existed. So even asking questions about, you know, how do I do this? What are these new things? What has happened in Edmonton? So that's also part of figuring out how to reintegrate back into community. And so having those conversations was very important for us to include in a system like Happy. And some more information on the background for the women or even people leaving prison systems across Canada. This trifecta that you all see here, when you're incarcerated, you're generally of a poor economic background. And beyond that, there might be some neurodevelopmental diagnoses that you might not be aware of. And so, for example, one of the most common diagnoses of people within the justice system is something called the fetal alcohol syndrome disorder. And so this is when, if someone is diagnosed with FASD, they generally have very limited executive functioning. They can't understand or comprehend things as quickly as everybody else. And so we've seen that, you know, people with FASD are 30% more likely to be part of the justice system. And the justice system is not built for people that are different in general. But these are always the people that actually end up there. So this trifecta is very important to remember because it builds on the lack of access individuals might have had before they either committed a crime or even after they come back, having served their sentences. So these conditions are not readily removed from before they went to prison to after they come back. And so how do we work with folks that are still existing in these conditions that surround them? So some information on who is Happy, or sort of the technical pieces of Happy. It is a generative artificial intelligence. So we've trained, I actually shouldn't say we haven't trained, we've done a lot of very clever prompt engineering, as you all know, to build a set of agents that fuels how Happy responds to a user's inquiry. So Happy actually has an agentic architecture. And we have multiple agents that help Happy determine if a user needs to navigate research, if the user requires any sort of mental health assistance, or if it's just a general conversation that someone wants to have about a certain topic. And I've talked about SMS, and the reason, again, I'm going to say we built it optimized for SMS so that all of the messages are as concise as they can be once they arrive on the phone. So the first superpower of Happy's that I want to talk about is navigating through thousands of resources. So like I've said, there are so many different websites. There are a lot of service providers that are trying to do the right thing of trying to help people go access support, and access services. But how do you navigate that? How do you make sure that, let's say you're someone leaving prison, for example, and you're 22, but you have 2 kids, and you need to find supports for yourself. Yes, you can look for housing and get generic supports, but you need to find housing that also accounts for the fact that you have children, right? And so these important factors are things that Happy considers in its response. So as you start to chat with Happy, it's going to try and ask all of the relevant pieces of information before providing you any guidance or next steps. So for example, this is just how Happy responds, just one of the examples here. So I asked Happy, I'm looking for housing support. And Happy responded by saying, okay, can you tell me a little bit more about what you're looking? Are you looking for short-term or long-term? And this is critical because short-term is more shelter. So, your homeless shelters, which are downtown and around Strathcona, so that's more short-term. But longer term could be more stable. So depending on where the person is in their journey, it's really trying to respond like a social worker or social services person would. So it has that training in the back end. This is an example of how the resources are presented in Happy. So you can see you have your contact information, phone number, and address. I don't know if I've included examples for directions, but one of the bigger things that we've really programmed within Happy is a lot of people using this obviously, can't email. They might not have Wi-Fi or enough data on their phone. So how do we get them to the place that they're wanting to go? And so we actually have Happy connected to Google Maps API. And so depending on where they are, if they even give us a landmark, we can actually figure out directions from point A to point B. And so in that way, they don't need any access to Wi-Fi in order to figure out how to get where they need to go. And so they can even call. Generally, most people have minutes. And another thing I think I should clear up. So most people leaving prison systems do have access to phones. I don't know if you've seen a lot of people, even if they are on the streets living in encampments, would have a phone. So that is the low barrier. There obviously are some individuals that don't have phones, and for them, different types of supports are needed. But most populations that we serve have a phone. And so that's why this is an easier way to give them access to different things. In this example, I asked Happy that I'm looking for housing south of Edmonton, so around the Millwoods area. And so this part 1 of 2, the first thing Happy recommends is a 2-bedroom unit, because sometime earlier in the conversation, I'd let Happy know that I was a single mom with kids. So it remembered. And that's a huge part of what we've built within this structure is memory. So no matter how many conversations you have with our system, it's going to remember those pertinent pieces of information about you, so that all of its recommendations over time build on your history that you have with this set of agents. And so it's remembered, and it provided a 2-bedroom unit. It also, it can provide exact apartments, but it can also provide nonprofits to help you kind of figure out different types of housing. And in this example, I'd also told Happy that I was a newcomer to the community. And so it's giving me it's giving me bus options, because it knows that I don't know how to get from point A to point B. And so this brings it back to navigation. So we're trying to give it, through this system, an end-to-end support. So it can be an actual companion as you leave and really help you with different aspects or different things you need. The second superpower, which I kind of alluded to in the beginning, is that gain in knowledge and skills. Trying to figure out, how you apply to subsidized housing. Like, what does that mean? What are the different pieces of information I need? So to give you an example, a lot of people, it's very hard to get housing because you generally need ID, but people leaving the system don't have up-to-date ID. But if you go to the registry, they keep asking you about, show me documents to prove who you are, but folks don't have documents to prove who they are to begin with because they've just left the system. So even having that nuance of understanding, okay, if someone doesn't have any piece of ID on them, no way to prove who they are. A lot of the times people leave different systems, they might have certain parole conditions that don't allow them to meet family members because those members might have been a contribution to why they committed their crime in the first place. So once they leave the system, they can go back to family for support because they're not allowed to, because if they breach the conditions, they might be put back. So how do you build yourself from the ground up with no supports at all, right? And no understanding of how to even get documentation. And so understanding the content, something Happy does. So it's really trying to, okay, if you don't have this, let's go here, let's brainstorm. And there's a lot of really wonderful organizations in our city that try and help people that are in that state. And so it helps them direct to these specific groups so that you can get yourself going and not really fall back into the same cycle that led you into prison in the first place. And our biggest outcome that we're hoping with a system like Happy that I'll talk about right now is we're hoping to give people enough understanding to build on their own stability. And so once they do build on their own stability, they're able to get employed, because that ultimately is how you contribute within the community that you are very meaningfully. So what is the best way for us to get employed is to improve their knowledge and skills and improve their understanding of the community they're in. And so working or having access to a system like this without Wi-Fi allows people to really build on their own skills, figure out what questions to ask, and try taking even smaller steps day by day to improving who they are as a person. The other aspect here I would like to talk about is the accessibility and inclusivity that we have within Happy. So a really big part of social services, or actually any service, as you all know, within the city, we all have business hours. So it's 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. That's it. Unless you make it between those hours, you're not able to get, serviced. And this sometimes is really hard for populations that are very transient. So for example, someone that's trying to get to, let's say, the Navigation Center, which is a center here downtown where you can get ID, housing, all of those things, but they are all the way in, Century Park. And the Navigation Center closes at 4 p.m. It's already 12 p.m., but they have to make their way to the Navigation Center. They don't have money to get transit. They might have to walk halfway there. They might have to figure out different to get there, but in the process of getting there, it might be closed. And so these are just daily realities of people that are trying to figure out what their next steps are. And so having a system like Happy allows them to understand, like, when are things open? How do I plan my route? Who do I talk to? Do I have to go ahead and figure out transit before then? And so because it's connected to Google Maps, we're able to get that real-time information and help them figure out those pieces before they make a decision. Even being able to call a specific resource before going there is a huge advantage for people that are trying to figure out how to best use maybe a couple of dollars that they have left for the day, right? So should they use it for something like this, figure out their transit, or should they use it for something else, right? So being that inclusive is very important. Like I've said, there's no Wi-Fi, no account needed. And one of the things we've realized building this, so we've built it directly for people that are going through this transition and trying to reintegrate. But as we've worked with different organizations here in the city and across Canada, we're realizing a system like ours can really help even staff that are trying to figure out what are the best resources for my client, right? So as long as they know information about their client, they can enter that information and be able to get very personalized recommendations based on their clients' different attributes or their experiences. And in terms of speaking style, so I just want to show you this example. As I've mentioned, a lot of people within the justice system have fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, and this really means that their comprehension is there, but it's limited. In most of the language models that we have right now, or just general literature that we have on resources, we all are generally at a grade 8 level. But someone with fetal alcohol syndrome disorder needs information between grade 3 and grade 6 levels. So how do you, like, one of the things we're doing is with the different agents we have within our structure, for this specific pilot that we have ongoing, is we're trying to make the information and the conversation as concrete, because concrete thinking is good for people that have limited executive functioning. And we're also trying to make the language between grade 3 and grade 6 level, so that when they do see information given to them, it's actually comprehensible and they're able to take those next steps. And then adding even visual cues with emojis really helps elevate that information. A lot of times people can even text an emoji back and be able to get directed to where they need to go. So being able to, use AI models to really meet people where they are, whether in their learning, in their comprehension, and how they see accessible information, has been awesome. I think this is one of the things that we've been very excited in building and learning what we can do. And we're going to continue kind of figuring that out. The last superpower of Happy's that I like to talk about is it does have, that mental health listening ear. As I mentioned earlier, maybe all of you might have tried this, is sort of, letting something like ChatGPT know how your day is going, what's been on your mind. I don't know if any of you have done this in this room. I have, just to, curiosity to see how something like this would respond. And in a similar vein, we've really tried to apply principles of trauma-informed speech and strength-based conversation within our tool. And so these are terms used heavily within, I would say, just therapy in general, or just general language when you're speaking to people that might have been experiencing a lot of trauma in their lives. And so the advisor I talked about earlier, Jessica, her research really looked at, as I'd mentioned, what success means for people leaving prison. So a lot of the language that she used within her research, all of those findings, we've taken that and used that to really prompt some of our agents, so that when we're dealing with more mental health related concerns, the conversations are geared in that evidence that she was able to create with her research. And so, for example, here, I asked Happy that I'm struggling with depression since my release, and I don't know how to talk about it. How am I going to find a job? And so this might seem very basic, where Happy's saying, I'm so sorry. It takes a lot of courage, but this whole aspect of being able to take small tasks every single day and accomplish little by little is grounded in the research that Jessica did with a lot of these women. For them, sometimes even taking things minute by minute or hour by hour and making sure that they're able to move forward, help them really ground themselves in their ability to believe in themselves. And that is really critical, a really critical part of, as you're trying to, reintegrate back into community and figure out your next steps here. So I think maybe you're all a little bit curious on maybe the guardrails and the privacy. So this example is actually directly from one of our pilots. So we had one of the ladies, she was too scared to text this on her own phone. So she asked me, will Happy respond to something like this? So we asked Happy, how do you pass a P test if you're dirty? And dirty essentially is if you've taken any substances. So if you've taken substances, your P test is going to indicate that you've taken some substance. And so Happy responded by saying, I cannot provide advice on how to pass a urine test. And so this is parts of what we've done here, where we're keeping the conversations as open as we can keep them, but we're also considerate of not promoting, illegal activities, illegal information, anything drug related. One of the things that we've built as part of our system, actually, yeah, it's not here, but what we've built as part of our system is we're reviewing the conversations to see if there are any crisis aspects to the conversation. So what I mean by that is if someone is displaying either violence towards themselves or others, or is, thinking of taking any kind of substances, or is just very, depressed or low or something like that, a crisis message is actually sent to our client who manages the program that this person might be part of, so that they can have a human intervene. Because as you know, we're trying to, one of the biggest things we're trying to do as we build something like Happy is figure out what that hybrid is between human and AI. Where does something like this come in existing social services? And I think as we move forward in the next 5 to 10 years, that hybrid understanding of where some models fit in certain sectors is of crucial need, right? Trying to figure that out. And the only way that you're able to really do that, what we've understood, is working directly with our clients and trying to figure out what programs, what set of activities or tasks make most sense for something like Happy to manage versus for something like them to manage. And so we're building that with them. Another thing that I didn't have examples here specifically, but I'd like to talk about is our check-in feature. So at the moment, we have a manual check-in that we're doing with some of our pilots where, based on the conversation someone might have had with our system, we review the conversation and we send a check-in message. So if someone, for example, has talked about food banks, we follow up in a couple of days and we ask, how did the food bank conversation go? Were you able to get food? Do you need something else? Right? And so our attempt here really is to see what parts of these check-ins can we automate in the future. And the reason being is most people that are coming out of the system fall under, very similar struggles or similar aspects of similar resources that they may need. And so is there any way we can predict what their one need might be based on their conversation, and then based on the aggregate that we're going to be collecting over the next couple of years? So our attempt really is to build Happy as this, as an actual system that can check in with them depending on if they're a high frequency need person or a low frequency need person. And so over time, it's this ultimate system that's able to keep them not only accountable, but keep them moving towards whatever success or goals they had in their own mind for next steps for themselves. So I'll just give you all like a bit of a preview of some of the partnerships that we have here. So Willow Winds is a great organization here in the city. They support clients that are leaving prison that have been diagnosed with FASD. And so we have a pilot with them. And we have 8 participants actually testing our Happy system currently. And so we're, working and seeing how conversations are with them. And I don't know if any of you here have heard of Mustard Seed, but we have a partnership with Mustard Seed. We have over 30 participants with them that have either just left prison or previously been justice involved. And when I say justice involved, I mean people that have faced incarceration in their past. And so saying something justice involved is just being more strength-based in how you speak about someone with a prison sentence in their past. And then the last pilot that we have is with John Howard, who I've recently renamed as Encompass. And so in this pilot that we're working with, we actually have 10 staff that are testing our system very rigorously before they hand it over to their clients, because they want this to be part of their approach of AI to social services. We also have a couple other pilots I haven't mentioned that I can't, but we're working in different areas across Canada to kind of see what are the best places for a system like this, and trying to get as much data as we can to improve some of our modeling and how our system works. So this bubble chart is some of the conversations we've seen across our pilots. So, we've had like things that we would expect, sort of like tax support and transport information, food aid, financial help, but we also have dating apps. We have people talking about whatever they really want, and that was one of the things that has happened. There's job search, general conversations, parenting advice of how to connect and build relationships. We've also had some people concerned with how Happy works and if Happy can read into their other apps and can Happy look at their Google and stuff like that. So we've had that user-driven privacy type of concern as well, which we've been able to work through. But also emotional support. So it's been live. It's been interesting to see how people use Happy and how, what we had intended for it to be used as versus how it's really being used. So over the next couple of months, what we're doing, so we started off in Edmonton. We've just built the next version of Happy, which is able to build a resource database from scratch for any region across Canada. So we do this by connecting to Google Maps, as well as Canada 211. I don't know if any of you know that, but it's sort of a database of all kinds of resources and services that are available across the country. And we're also, one of our agents, specifically the researcher agent, is actually connected directly to the web. So we have an API to Perplexity that we review to try and understand what are the best resources for a given set of queries, a given set of questions. But we use that depending on some of the logic we've built in on how an inquiry might be coming in. Right now, we're only text, but we do see a version of Happy being available through voice, because Happy really acts as a next step of AI helpline. So when you're looking at a helpline like either 911 or 988, which is the suicide helpline, what would that look like if it was all AI led? So that's kind of the space in which we're trying to go into. And we see applications for voice and video as well, as a lot of this, whether it's Sora from ChatGPT and other models that are coming out, it's becoming more, not open source, but more available, I would say. So as that does become available, we're going to try tap into that as much as possible. And as we collect a lot of data, what we're seeing, a lot of the information that we're working with, it's pretty much invisible in existing models. So for example, what I mean by that is if someone is leaving a gang here in the city, and if they tell Happy, I'm trying to leave, but I need to, but I have my minutes. What do I do about my minutes? This type of conversation or this lexicon is not available readily on any type of language model. And what minutes in this context means is that they owe something to this gang, and unless they do that, they're not allowed to leave. So we're seeing very distinct conversations around justice, which are very unique to the context of a region. It could be very prairie specific, it could be Canada specific, it could be very regional in terms of the dialect and the lexicon that we're seeing. And that, I think, is critical in how, once we start to get more and more data, we're going to see how we can build our own custom models and then fine tune that for these specific scenarios that we're seeing. And the other aspect that we're hoping for Happy to always be is constantly learning. We haven't added a lot of that into our systems yet, but that is part of, either learning from individual conversations or learning overall. As I mentioned before, I think there are patterns to how people use resources. So if, for example, if someone is using, if someone's requesting for food and housing at one part of the day, they might be requesting for another set of resources the following day. So what is that connection? And can we see that? And then on the flip side, can we also see where services might be missing in different regions, right? If people are trying to access something and nothing's coming up, what does that mean? And so it can be very important for different, either different policy, different communities, different cities to see what services are and how do we map them based on how users are interacting with a system like this. We're also I mentioned this briefly, but we're also seeing a lot of adaptation on the staff side to support people. And so in order to help staff who do have access to laptops and a PC and other things, we're hoping to build a web version of Happy, which is easy to replicate for that. And also have something around WhatsApp, because a lot of people now, I think as plans become easier to navigate, most people do have data, right? So can we do something with WhatsApp and make it easier if that is the first point of entry for most of the people, leaving prison here. And so right now we're really focused on the justice system. So we're working with different entities, whether it's Corrections Canada, whether it's provincial correctional facilities or federal correctional facilities or social service organizations that support people in and around prisons. That has been our focus. But with some of the work we're doing with the fetal alcohol syndrome disorder pilots and other groups, we see this type of system working for people with brain domain issues. So other examples could be potentially, you could look at autism or ADHD, and what does their interaction with a language model potentially look like? Like, these are things that have not been researched, and there's a lot of potential to see, what their print would be, or what their conversation, or how they shape how they talk to something like Happy or an AI in general. Like I mentioned, helplines that are AI-led. These are things that are already happening, whether it's in police or just general federal programs that look at helplines. Are already trying to see how to implement AI internally, but this is something we definitely see moving towards. And then mental health. I think one of the things that I highlighted is success really hinges on where you are inside your own head. And so can something like this democratize mental health to a level where you can maybe have a 30-minute tech session, completely AI-led, that could be accounted for as therapy, right? And I know a lot of different variations of this is being done in different places. But I think it's important to have as I've said before, our development really centered around some of the partners that we're working with. So how can we work with them to see what works best in some of the stressful situations they are, and what would mental health mean during crisis? So that's where we would kind of focus on and build from there. That's it. So I'll stop here. I'm happy to take questions.